Okay, here we go. Hello, hello, hello. We are live. Welcome to Midweek Worship. How are all of you doing tonight? So we want to say hello to everyone and give everybody a chance to log on and get everybody caught up with us. Usually takes just a second and then everybody's here. And we want to say welcome. Yes, now everybody's coming on. And I want to let you know that if you are watching us on Facebook, I do have the ability to look at what you say. I have it on the phone, so it's to my right. So I can look and see your comments. If you have any prayers and concerns you'd like to let us to know about, please let us know. Any updates you'd like to let us know if you've given us a prayer. We had a few people with knee surgeries and some different things going on. So please let us know if you want to give us any type of update. And then we also want to just let you know a couple of things. This week we have Lydia Widman is going to be giving our sermon this week at 10 a.m. at our Sunday service. That's outside weather permitting. Bring your own chair, bring your own mask. And if not, you can always join us Facebook Live as per usual. If it goes on raining, we'll always have a Facebook Live. So there we have that. And then we have College and Career at 2 on via Zoom. And then youth group, weather permitting, is going to have an outside event. More information to come. So without any further little delay, and to not keep you waiting, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker tonight. We have Brian Collis with us, and he is going to bring us a message dealing with waiting. So I'm going to mute myself, and we're going to send it on over to Brian.
Greetings. Okay, so for this, I was going back and forth quite a bit on what to talk about, and but this idea of waiting has been sort of like, it's been on my mind a lot lately. So I figured that's kind of what I wanted to do. And as an intro, I kind of took some of the issues, some of the things that I wrote about in my last 2 marriage moments, and kind of use that as an intro to sort of what my sort of final piece of is. So as you all know, every time I've spoken at midweek, I always try to challenge you a little bit by my final, by my sort of, by when I sum up what I'm talking about. So that's not going to be any different today. All right, so this is kind of where my mind's at right now. So we're all creatures of habit, right? The world we inhabit, or should I say, the world we inhabited, because it's not the same world anymore, it pretty much demanded that we sort of have sort of structures and routines. The world was, busy and fast paced, and so we needed these sort of things in place so that we could get through our day and actually accomplish anything. Because without routines, without sort of structure to our day, we'd have to think about what to do in each moment, and we'd use all that sort of mental bandwidth figuring out these little things throughout the day, and we'd never get anything done. We'd lag in productivity. So I know there's always the story that Einstein actually had 7 identical suits, so that he never had to think about what he was wearing when he woke up in the morning. It was just the next one in line. Never had to think, never had to spend his mental power on worrying about what to wear. So he could spend all his mental bandwidth on big ideas of quantum physics and relativity. And so with the pandemic still raging, at least in this country, so most, if not all, of the structures that we had in place were taken away quite suddenly. And it left people kind of flailing, because without these sort of structures and routines, all of a sudden we're paralyzed, right? Because we had these ideas of what we were going to do each day, and all of a sudden all that was out the window. And so we had fear of the unknown, and stress about making ends meet, and anxiety about the future, and all this stuff kind of tends to sort of lump up on us when all of a sudden we have all this time now to sort of sit and think, right? So we don't have the normal things that we're doing. We're not running breakneck pace all over the place. And so now we have time to think. And if you're not prepared for that, sometimes, you're not very good company for yourself. I know, at least I'm not. So I think it's imperative, like, as we go into this now, that we have to sort of like create sort of new structures. And I'm going to sort of posit that we sort of take this present situation that we still find ourselves in, and we really look at it as a gift, right? Because the old pace we tried to live at, we can ask ourselves, was that really sustainable? I mean, how many of us were always sort of tired and cranky and stressed and feeling we didn't have enough time to live life and to enjoy it, and to hang out with our family, and to do these other things we wanted to do and pursue our hobbies. And So maybe what we thought of as normal 6 months ago really wasn't sustainable and wasn't doing us much good. So there can be less and less doubt now as we get into. I'm not even going to say we're at the end of what we're in, because things are slowly coming back, but I don't think we're at the end of it. But I don't think we can really think of ourselves as just we're going to at some point just return to what was normal. I don't think that normal is going to exist anymore. As much as the weirdness that we're still going through makes us think sort of longingly about what was, I don't think we can just go back to it. And if we look hard at sort of what we were living in, January, February, March, we might come to realize that the old way that we were trying to live our lives was broken. The pandemic didn't really break the systems, but it did lay bare and sort of like make clear what was broken, I think. So as things slowly start to return to something that resembles the old normal now, I think we're not out of the woods. And I think we have a chance now to sort of rethink and sort of reorganize our lives and sort of rebuild and sort of create sort of new structures and new routines that hopefully will serve us better than the old ways were. We still have time here, and with each small step, as things sort of come back online, I know here in New Jersey, I think on Tuesday, gyms are allowed to reopen, at 25% capacity. I know, Dave, that makes me happy too. But, I think as each one of these things kind of gets back to us, I think it gives us a chance to sort of reevaluate it, because it's not been available. It's not been part of our lives for the last 6 months. And so now I think we have a chance to sort of reevaluate these things as they come back into our lives and really consider, are they doing us good? Can we do them the same way? Do we do them different ways? And it gives us a chance to sort of reevaluate them as each one comes up. So the thing, are these things good for us? Does it further God's kingdom? Does it help, my spiritual growth or my emotional growth? These are the things we have to ask as possibilities to do things and go places come back into our lives now. I think it gives us a chance to sort of rethink all of these things as they come back. Now, before, I think the structures, that we lived in previously were all, for the most part, imposed, from the outside, right? So we had school and activities and work and church and volunteering, and with everything shut down, we are now the source of any sort of structure that we want to put into our lives, right? So like nothing's being imposed on us right now. We can sort of come up with these things. Many people, like in the let's call it the old world, struggled sometimes with saying no to outside bids for their time. Every time somebody at church asked you to do something, oh, sure, I'll help out, without really thought about, does that tax me too much? Am I doing too much already? Is this going to really help me? I might be helping somebody at the church, but if I'm costing myself stuff, that there's a cost there that becomes too much. And so now the world has said no to everything for us for the last 6 months, right? So again, it gives us that chance to sort of rethink these things. So we can rebuild our routines for ourselves and for our families. And I think we need to really critically examine what we will say yes to in the future. So if we build wisely now, creating routines that allow us, time with our spouses, time with our families, time with, all these things, hopefully we can carefully consider these things that will take our time in the future away from what we've had for the 6 months that we've been living in now. So whether things fully open up later this fall or next year or 2 years from now, we should aim to have sort of our foundations sort of strengthened and ready to go back full time into the world again, hopefully better prepared than we were 6 months ago. So one of the things I call it, in Luke 6, 47 and 48, Jesus says, I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words, and acts on them. That one is like a man building a house who dug deeply and laid the foundations on rock. When a flood arose, the river burst against that house, but could not shake it because it had been well built. As an architect, this verse always really speaks to me. Foundations are kind of important. And that's what we have to look at right now. What we have is this chance to sort of rebuild our foundations. So when the world does come flooding back in, we can stand against it and stand strong. We have a chance to sort of consider what might have been shifting sand in the past, and do we have a chance to sort of metaphorically relocate our foundations to more solid ground? So you really have to ask yourself, what do you want your life to look like next month or next year, or when things normalize, or if they don't normalize anytime soon? What do you want your life to look like? You have a chance right now to set forth boundaries and create guidelines and create these new routines that honor God and then strengthen both you and your family and the people around you. And if you think about it, it's kind of like, we have a chance right now to sort of like, the world is fairly chaotic right now. And we have a chance to sort of intentionally sort of create order out of this. The world is just swirling chaotically around us. And we have a chance to sort of like impose our own order on our lives and on how we're going through this. And if you think about it, there are a few ways to be more like God than creating order out of chaos. It's really literally the first thing we see about God in the Bible in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. It says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And then the rest of the story obviously goes through sort of the creation, where there is nothing. And by this act of intentional speaking, God creates all the order, all the sort of systems and structures of the world that we live in. So it's not a very big leap to look around current events now and see chaos all over the place, between the pandemic and, protests against police brutality and all this other stuff. I mean, there's just chaos everywhere. And so what we do right now, the way we sort of rethink our lives and how we're going through this can really not only shape our lives as we go forth, but we can really sort of recreate the world we live in through our collective reorganizing of what we're going through. That's always true, but I think right now the world is at this point where it's sort of an inflection point where, because everything has stopped, we really have a chance now to choose how we start things up again and how we go forward. We have a chance to really, talk about what a post-COVID world looks like and what it will be. And through the things that we do, the big questions that we ask now, how we're living, we have a chance to really influence what that post-COVID world looks like. Now, it is kind of, it can be overwhelming to ask these questions of ourselves, right? So if we know in general, our purpose here is to sort of help usher in God's kingdom. But when we ask what we should be doing to make that happen, those are big questions that it can be really, really easy to sort of get for us to feel lost within that. I mean, we really can start asking ourselves, how big an impact can I have with just, how I choose to go throughout my day? We can seem so small in the world's context. And again, that we run the risk of then being so overwhelmed that we're paralyzed and we don't do anything. It seems easy to sort of like sit and wait. And, we can even find verses like Psalm 27, 13 and 14 says, I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. And then again in Isaiah 40, 30 through 31, it says, youth shall faint and be weary and young men shall fall exhausted, but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. So it's easy, I think, to take from those verses, okay, we're supposed to wait. But especially at the end of Isaiah, we're also supposed to fly and run and walk and not get weary. So I think there's things in this that we're in this situation that we're going through that I think we need to be doing. And I think, obviously I think those things are different from each of us. Not like I can just sit here and tell everybody what to do. I think that's gonna, God has designed each of us uniquely to do his kingdom work. And I think each of us has different jobs to do. But I think we need to be really careful to not just sit and wait for God to act. He might very well have given us all this free time so that we can act, so that there are things that we can do that we didn't have time to before. So this could be our opportunity to do the kingdom work that he has set aside for each of us. And Joshua 18, 2 and 3 says, but there were still 7 Israelite tribes, just for context. This is after they had been in the promised land for a while, and 5 of the tribes had claimed their portion of the inheritance. And 7 tribes still had not yet received their inheritance, even though they were in the promised land. And Joshua said to the Israelites, how long will you wait before you begin to take possession of the land that the Lord your God has given you? And again, so I think they were, the land that was conquered, but like they hadn't actually just done the work to go and take what was theirs. So now, I mean, obviously it's easy to sort of, it's always easy to see these biblical characters. I mean, they're speaking directly to God and like, God has written this. Oh, God said this. And oh, okay, so I heard him. And I don't think that's always necessarily the case for us. So if we aren't hearing God's voice telling us directly what should we be doing, it's easy to do nothing, right? It's like I'm waiting for word. Or if we hear God but don't understand what he's telling us, or if it sounds strange, or if it sounds silly, or if it sounds uncomfortable, we can convince ourselves to hold off and wait for further clarification, or that's not quite it, is it, God? So you need to think of Jonah deciding not to go to Nineveh, right? God told him specifically where he was going. And he's like, yeah. And Jonah thought that in his own mind, yeah, that's not really where I'm supposed to be, and waited for further word, and then wound up getting eaten by a whale. So there's consequences to not responding, I think. So you can contrast Jonah, right, with, since we were just talking about Joshua, think about, when Jericho stood before them and Joshua was like, all right, how do we defeat Jericho? God said, all right, walk around it for 7 days and then blow some horns. Be really easy for Joshua. That's really not what he meant, right? Maybe we should just go and, attack the front gate. But he actually mustered the entire nation of Israel to do this, what, on the face value seemed a ridiculous thing. And then Jericho fell. So I think even when we're not convinced that what God is telling us is what we're supposed to be doing, I think we need to sort of maybe take him at face value sometimes. And again, if we have faith that God knows what he's doing, that he's in control, and that his will be done, whether or not we do our part or not. I mean, God already knows what we're going to do, and he's got contingency plans for however we react to these things. But I think then that gives us some sort of comfort and clarity that we can just do what we think we feel, and whatever we do, God's will is going to be done anyway. So I thought it was really interesting. I was listening to a sermon this past weekend, and the pastor brought up Romans 8:28, which, I mean, it's a famous verse, and I've always known it for, and Romans 8:28 is, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And I've always sort of gone to that verse in times of suffering, or when things are going wrong, you look at the situation around you and say, okay, even in this, God's will is being done, as God's working these things for good. But I think that, and the pastor made this point over the weekend, is that you can also take this to be, no matter what you do, God will use that for good as well. If you feel that, if you were called according to his purpose, God will take whatever effort you put forth and also be able to use that. So, I mean, if it works in our trials and our tribulations and our sufferings, does that verse not also apply to our failures and our false starts and our missteps and our wandering and our being lost? All of those things, if we are truly called according to God's purpose, God will use for the greater good. So that I've been thinking a lot about that, is that, so basically, if you feel you're supposed to be doing something, but you don't know what to do, you can just do something. And even if you fail at it, even if it falls apart, you will have learned something from that you can take forward. And then God's going to still use that effort, even if it seems like it's a colossal failure. God still can use that effort to further his kingdom. So I think that's really sort of comforting, is we don't really need to worry about screwing up, because God's already taken that into account anyway. So yeah, as we go into sort of the third stage of this pandemic, I've been sort of thinking about this, is, after, everything shuts down in March, and then, right around summertime, right at the beginning of summer, so it would have been the end of the first of the previous school year. At that point, we had already all been sort of out of work and out of school, and for as long as a normal summer vacation. And so then we were going into summer vacation. So it's almost like, yeah, all right, well, now it's summer. So now everything's, I think a lot of people just sort of tossed out and sort of gave up on the last school year. And then, all right, but now it's summer. Well, but now summer's over too, right? Almost. So not that I'm trying to rush it, but so now we're coming to this third stage, and things still aren't back to normal. And so I think we really need to, at this point, I think any hope of a sort of a quick fix obviously is out the window. And I really don't think we can assume any is going to just magically snap everything back to normal anytime soon at this point. So I think, and that's really, as we hit sort of this next milestone, is where I was really thinking about, if we've been kind of putting things off till this point, now we still actually have time to reconsider all of these things, to reconsider what we want our lives to be, to reconsider what we want our work life to be, what we want our home lives to be, how we want to live our lives in this world that we're still in. So, things should be resuming their new normal rhythms and patterns now, but they're not. things are still weird. And in our Bible study group, I guess it might have been even right before the pandemic, we kind of, on this one long conversation we were having, we got to the point, we summed it all up by saying, just accept that it's going to be weird and embrace it. It's going to be awkward, embrace the weird. At this point, I think that's what we have to do. But again, I think within that weird, that means we still have this opportunity to presenting itself to us to sort of seize this moment and make our lives what they want to be. We can live the lives that God has called us to. We can become the lamp on the lampstand if we can get ourselves out from under the basket. We can be that city shining on a hill if we can make ourselves walk up that path. So there's, the old saying goes, if only I knew then what I know now, which implies that, wisdom has come to you or come to us sort of too late to impact what our lives were. So like that sort of that line, that phrase speaks of sort of regret, like, oh, now I know what I should have done last week, last month, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Right. So there's regret in that, like, oh, the wisdom came to me too late. But again, the same pastor that I quoted earlier, he did a sermon series earlier this summer entitled, If Only I'd Know Later What I Know Now. So he sort of flips that, right? So like, if you think about what we're going through right now, there's things we're supposed to be learning right now. There's things we're supposed to be learning within this sort of chaotic mess that we're going through that are going to help us later. And so the trick is to understand what we're supposed to be learning and sort of make note of it now. So when we get to that situation in the future, whenever that might be, we don't say, oh, if only I knew now what I knew then. So it's like, you sort of realize the wisdom is coming to you now for you to sort of to fortify yourself, to sort of prepare yourself for things that are still to come. We're learning things now that are for our good, that are meant to improve our lives and help us usher in the kingdom of God. And so there's my, the challenge for all of us is you need to ask yourself, what is God teaching you in this weirdness? What is God calling you to do? And I think the answers that we're all going to find to those questions can have a drastic impact on what the world becomes in a month, next year, even 5 years down the road. So I think that's really the important thing, is sort of, instead of just sit around and longing for what was, we need to realize that we're in this for a reason. We're supposed to be arming ourselves and equipping ourselves with what's going on now for things that are still to come. And so that's sort of like my challenge for all of us, is really, ask yourself these big questions. What are we supposed to be learning now to take forward into the future, to be better prepared to usher in God's kingdom, which is really what we're all here to do. So there's my big question, and that's where I'm gonna leave it with you guys. So if you want to sit back and if we want to discuss, I'm more than willing to discuss.
Okay. All right, I'm going to bring us into gallery view and ask everybody to unmute. There we go. Hello, Hector.
Hello. Hey. Sorry, guys. I'm in the basement. I just got done with the workout, so.
We noticed that, sir. Nice. You're like in like the creepy section. No, it's fine.
Know. Yeah.
In the creepy section. That's where all the hard work happens.
Yeah.
No, I think this is a very good message. I'm going to let other people say. I wrote down a few things, so I'm good to share, but I'll ask Hector and Dave what they thought. And then we have some people watching, and they've been watching. So if anybody on who watched the message wants to make a comment, put it on the Facebook, and I'll reiterate it to the group.
Cool. Hector, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I mean, I popped in a little later, but one of the things that really jumped out was just, how you were talking about God even being able to use, the times where we mess up, where we don't get things right all the time because we're human, right? And that's really, really kind of freeing and encouraging to kind of know that it doesn't rest on us. Like God's will and his plans don't rest firmly on us. It's cool that he calls us to participate and be a part of what he's doing, but it doesn't all start and end with us. And that's hard to it's hard to remember sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. Especially us.
I'd never heard Romans 8:28 in that context before. It's always been like in the context of like, dealing with suffering and all those other things. But like, it's really kind of, like you said, it's kind of freeing to realize that, he can use our failures too and our missteps, and, we get lost and fall down. Like, he uses that as well.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, I guess a phrase I've heard before is God equips the available and not like the talented.
Yeah, I think the way I heard that was God equips the called, he doesn't call the equipped.
There you
Yeah,
go. There you go.
that's good.
There you go. I gave you the Hector International version of it.
Cool.
Dave.
Oh, my turn. Okay. I really, really thought what you said was really good, Brian. It made me think of how we are now in this situation where we're now being given the option to reevaluate all the different areas of our lives. But what it made me think of, because I recently bought a day planner, which I haven't done in a very long time. But I didn't buy the normal one that I normally buy. I bought the day planner as opposed to like the weekly month planner. So in it, it's fancy. It's from Target. In it, it has spaces for, I don't know if anybody can see this, but it has spaces for like all the different times of the day to do stuff.
Oh,
And so even though we're being given this option to reevaluate different areas of our lives, we still have the same 24 hours. And a lot of times previously, until these past couple of weeks, I used to get really upset where I would make a huge to-do list and have a lot to do, and then I would never get all of it done. So by putting it in time slots, because I'm a super organized person, everyone who knows me knows this, it helps me understand the value of time and understand that, you know what, there was no time for me to actually get this thing that I wanted to get done. So I'm now not that upset about it. And then I just move it on to the next day. So I think sometimes thinking about your day in practical terms can help you realize what you can actually fit into it.
Yeah, the leadership guy, Darren Hardy, I listened to, he basically did a whole like an hour-long teaching on just that, Dave, on sort of like giving up on to-do lists and making schedules instead. He said it's a radical sort of shift in thought, but it makes you really understand that you only have X amount of time, and instead of setting up yourself for failure, for putting like 38 things on your to-do list when your day was only ever going to support 20 of those 38 things.
Yep.
So all of a sudden you don't set yourself up for failure that way.
Right. And like I'll incorporate things on there too, like not just like, oh, I'm meeting this person for dinner. I'll incorporate that I have to drive to this place to meet said person for dinner, and I have to drive home, because a lot of times we don't account for those, and then we get upset because, oh, I could have done so. Oh no, I couldn't have because I was in the car.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Mel, your turn.
Okay. I think that I'll feed right off of that. I think with this time, there's one thing is doing things like this, when we're done, we're still home, but then we go out and do something, and we realize, Dave, we do realize there's time to take that to get there and time to get back, and there's actual time. It is something that if we look at this time, where will we be when we're looking forward? Like, what do we want to learn? That's one thing. One thing you said, Brian, that really stuck out to me, we're talking about reevaluating, all the things of our lives, like how we work our lives. We talked about, you made the comment about if someone asked you to help in church, you just say yes. And we all know that that's basically the case. And I think this was a great time to evaluate the help or / giving threshold, like your own personal helping / giving threshold. In other words, you've been home, you've had time to see how much time you actually need to recharge your own battery. And I will say personally, I learned I need more time to recharge my own battery to be a better servant to God and for others by learning this. And so that's one thing I'm ever so grateful for. All the time while we've been waiting to get back to a normal, I do think that we'll reevaluate, church and how we do things. I still think we're going to serve the public. I still think we're going to serve people in all different ways, but I do think a lot of people will have reevaluated and we will do it different. I think some things will go back because that happens. Panic time happens. Everybody jumps in and joins. But I do think there's a lesson here.
Absolutely.
And I think that the self-care finally came in. And, you know, it's funny. We don't think about our health until we're sick. Really. Like, we go through day to day, and sometimes we're feeling up or down, but we're like, oh no, gotta push through. I just had a small little ailment of my own. It doesn't matter what it was, but it totally took me out for 3 days, and I couldn't do anything. And I realized that I have to sit here and take care of my health. And Mike had said to me, oh, it's your day off and you're actually sitting. I said, when I'm sick, I actually feel like I have a reason that I can just sit here. But why don't I feel like I have that reason to recharge my battery so I don't get to that place before I get incapacitated to sick? I think with this time has shown us how much we need to stay healthy so that way we can remain healthy. I think that's good. Somebody from Florida, CJ Scolari, says, greetings from Florida. Well said, Brian. Excellent message. So see, Brian, people are paying attention. They're watching.
Yeah, CJ Scolari was the best man at my wedding. He was my
okay.
Friend from college. So
well, they like your message, and that's good. But that was one of my biggest points, was that. And the other one was, if we look at this, and Romans 8:28 is one of my favorites. I'm actually looking on a message I'm working on myself right now for that. And I was looking at that, but I have always been a positive person. There's this silly little brain heart thing, that cartoon that's out there in the world and people have seen it. And there's the heart and the brain are walking and like something's on fire, and he's like, oh, look at the warm fire. And then there's like, you know, like the fire and like aliens are coming down. He's like, oh, look at the happy aliens. And like things are chaotic, but the heart is happy. That's me. I mean, the world's on fire, and I'm like, oh, look at the flames. They're pretty, you know. And not to take away from destruction. That's not what I'm saying. But I think there is something to looking at the positive side of spirituality, you know, while the world looks at something in chaos. And look what we can learn in our spirituality through suffering to help us, to better equip us to deal with the chaos, because what we're really doing is letting God lead us in the chaos instead of letting the world tell us this is how bad it is and it's going to be this bad. But they're not in charge, and that's the point. You know, I think that's something. I had another comment from Patty. She said, we take our health for granted until we don't have it, which is exactly what I said. So thank you, Patty. Yes, we do. But I think that's my other point that I thought that you were making. I think just, you know, this is the time to reevaluate and look at, you know, you had talked about, you know, kind of honing in on our faith more. So when we go back into a quote unquote normal, we have those skills, we have that foundation that, you know, just like when we had Superstorm Sandy, people realized they had to raise their houses, or the area they live in, they're going to keep flooding. Well, we've learned in the storm of this just how much we need to build our foundations and strengthen our reinforcements so that we can power through. I think you touched on all that so well. So I wrote that down.
And I think it's really cool. I think the best thing about the way this is happening, if you're going to find a bright spot in it, is because things are coming back so slowly, you really do have a chance to evaluate each thing that comes back sort of on its own merits before you know what I mean? I'd heard a story, somebody was speaking on the Amish a long time ago, and they were saying the Amish aren't necessarily against all technology. They just tend to take like generations to evaluate something before they decide whether or not it's worth bringing into their culture. So like 100 years from now, they might be to the point, all right, you know what, phones are all right. So, you know, you never, but that's the whole thing, is like they take this really long view of evaluating these things and trying to determine whether or not they're good, they're helpful, if they're edifying, you know what I mean, before they sort of just like, and I think as a species, I think we're generally really bad at that. You know what I mean? As far as, I think we're always ready to just sort of grab the next new thing with no thought as to the second, third, and even fourth level consequences of what that thing is bringing.
Very true. Mel, I also thought that it was great that you brought up the reflection of the time you need to be able to serve in the mindset of like, I have a problem as well where I have plenty of paid time off that I can take from work. I can't bring myself to take it. at all, because I don't need it. I feel like I need it when I'm sick, or
Right.
like if someone's getting married, or I need to leave early because somebody's in the hospital. Like, to me, that's an excuse to take a paid day off, not just for me. But I'm changing that. I actually I printed out a calendar of the year and looked at when the days that I am actually off by the company that I work for. And I looked at from Labor Day until Thanksgiving, there's something anywhere between like 10 and 12 weeks, which is a long time to not have a day off. So I'm like, maybe I'll take a day off in the middle of there.
Mm-hmm.
Treat myself.
I got to take some time eventually. That's like the hardest thing to do,
Yeah.
but I think it does need to be done.
Mhm.
So
Right, and you can, you don't have to think of it as being selfish either. I mean, you can always look at, the airline safety thing at the beginning of every flight, right? You got to put on your own oxygen mask first before you can help anyone around you.
Yep.
I think we also, if we look at it from a spiritual side, because you're saying we could take time with God. I mean, I can't tell you, and I'll be honest, full like transparency. I can't remember last time I took a vacation, and was like, okay, now let me make sure I have time to put in my devotion and make sure I have time to put in extra time with God, because I finally have time to sit down.
Mhm.
Like, when was the last time? I have not done that. That is not something that I personally think about a vacation and think, okay, I got this much time. We're going to drive somewhere. We're going to eat here. And I'm a planner when we go on vacation, all that stuff. And not once. And I admit it with my own notion of guilt. I'm going, oh, crud, this is something. But I don't make extra time to say, okay, I finally have time to sit down and read this devotional book, or I have time to sit down and really just take in some scripture and really apply it deeply and noticeably. And I think that's something that if I looked at in a reevaluation, I have 3 weeks of vacation. It's going to be September. I only have to December to use it. There's some time there that I could use for spiritual faith and just maybe replenishment of my own recharging spiritual battery. So I think that's just something that I never even thought of until you said it. And I'm like, maybe there's some time.
And that's cool, because I'll admit I have never been never done a whole lot on vacation either, until we went to Ireland I guess it was 2 years ago now, because we happened to be in Dublin on Sunday morning. So we actually went to church at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I mean,
so cool.
We just happened to be there. It's like, oh, cool, this would be neat. And as we were walking, like the bell, like the bells that were made in like 1200 were like ringing. I'm like, holy cow! It was an amazing moment to go to church there. It was it really made me rethink that whole idea of allowing time on vacation for those things.
Yeah, we usually find a different church, but that's about it. There's not much more than that if we're gone on a Sunday. But so yeah, definitely something to look for.
Cool.
All right. So, yeah. Anything else? Anybody?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
But it was great. Great job, Brian.
Thanks.
Brian, I think you did an excellent job, and I really appreciate you giving us the time. And I just want to thank everybody who commented on Facebook, and we'll be coming to you live again on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. So join us then.
Woo.
Thank you all.
Come again.
Bye.